Is that motherfucking Miles Morales in Chicago? Boy, I saw a Grinch on one of the screens. Oh no. Yeah. Oh, oh my. Alright, I'm gonna get into this slideshow in a minute. Finish the bowl here, collect my thoughts, pull up the right browser tabs. I mean, I got most of my info right here. I do have the sources open in a browser so that if there was something to talk about a little more in depth, I can pull from the source. Um, in this slideshow, I have one video that we're gonna pause and watch for like, I don't remember, 10, 20 minutes. Um, but I went to find a video with actual accounts from people who were at the internment camps themselves. There's some good info out there that's been presented by reporters on like PBS and stuff, but like it's a lot better when folks can tell their own stories, you know? Oh my. Damn. I don't know. I don't think so. Oh, let's try it out. Butt stuff. Not the emote only. It's still, I mean, like, oh, even VIP? That's cool. VIP's immune to the mode. Yeah, right. I do have to take it off of this. Sorry, I have to take the emo wall off for now. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. All right. Thank you again for chilling, showing up for the fundraiser. Um we throw out a goal, but it's never a problem. As long as we make the time. We've made our own contributions. My friend Anastasia donated $20. Kieran donated 25, and I took $50 from last month's subscriptions and put it towards the Tiltify charity campaign as well for the community, from the community. Thank you for making that contribution together. Um, yeah. Today's fundraiser event, we're calling it Agua sin hielo, water without ice. Mi taza está llena, sin hielo, por favor. My cup is full, no ice, please. Mm-hmm. That's about the best way I could express how I think how we all feel. We've already got so many things on our plate. A lot of us are still trying to register 2020 Harambe. Um, On top of just surviving everyday life, man. I don't really see it necessary to be at this point. Um, oh yes. Oh, now it went away. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, there's fancy. Oh, it's in yellow. Water without ice. Yeah. And as we've seen today through the other broadcasts, there are many gatherings, peaceful assembly across the nation. Um, a lot of people are showing up in Los Angeles, but we just watched a lot like out in Seattle, Washington, San Francisco, Louisiana, Portland, Oregon, um, and beyond. You know, they're all over the place. People are gathering right now to express their grievances with the government's decision to attack immigrants when we are a nation built on immigrants. There's a known history of all of this, and you know I don't really need to dive into that. There's plenty of time for anybody to look at this written history. Um, so today I just wanted to express a little bit about the Tiltify campaign again. We're fundraising for ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. You can go and get more information about ACLU through aclu.org or aclusocal.org. Um, Governing entities have taken wrongful action near home in Los Angeles, California. We stand with our friends, family, and the community that raised us. We support those who attempt peaceful assembly against ICE and their unjust cause. Our elders were witness to Manzanar, the Watts riots, and the Rodney King riots, and truly, I feel this. They've learned nothing, um, as they are the ones, like I said, who wish to lead, be in charge, and have hearsay over what we should be doing, while telling us to make good choices, do the right thing. Um, we're what we're really against with ICE, particularly, we stand against the inhumane practices of U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, the endangerment of children under lawful activity. Like I said before, they're the next generation. Those are the people that are going to be around 50 years, 80 years from now, remembering what's happening today, you know. And that's something that we've been really trying to shift away from, is this chaos. The kidnapping and deportation of law-abiding citizens, it's been happening for a good minute now. It's gotten to a point where, you know, they're going beyond investigation and pursuing those considered illegal immigrants, but they're just indiscriminately grabbing people, not vetting them, and sending them far away. You know, to be detained by the authorities for a 24-hour period is one thing. Try several weeks. You know, mostly straight up, like one of these things I am very against. The denial of basic human dignity while demanding anonymity. Like, we have put together all of these checks and balances, receipts, freaking body cams, badge numbers, and for some reason, it's okay for this group from the Department of Homeland Security, our government, to go around wearing masks without any identification and just snatching people. And like they're demanding us to be like transparent. It's crazy. You know. Do you know your rights? That's a big thing, you know. We had just a little bit. We had delved into it about remembering some things for yourself. Like I said, your info, who you are, where you're from, your driver's license number, your social security, because documentation is one thing. That was also another thing, documentation. Fucking record that shit. um, Always remember when it comes to this kind of thing, your right to hold peaceful assembly. The Constitution's First Amendment literally reads Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Um, and you can go and look at that yourself if you're really about it. There's that. And here we have our protesters' rights. Something that if you're going out and about to the public to commit to peaceful assembly, you should be aware of your rights and how you can work to do this without immediately getting ascertained by the police or something stupid. Um, you could head to aclu.org/no-your-rights slash protesters dash rights. Um, so, your rights. Your rights are strongest in what are known as traditional public forums, such as streets, sidewalks, and parks. You also likely have the right to speak out on other public property, like plazas in front of government buildings, as long as you are not blocking access to the government building or interfering with other purposes the property was designed for. Private property owners can set rules for speech on their property. The government may not restrict your speech if it is taking place on your own property or with the consent of the property owner. Counter protesters also have free speech rights. Police must treat protesters and counter protesters equally. Police are permitted to keep antagonistic groups separated, but should allow them to be within sight and sound of one another. When you are lawfully present in any public space, you have the right to photograph anything in plain view, including federal buildings and the police. On private property, the owner may set rules related to photography or video. What to do if you believe your rights have been violated. When you can, write down everything you remember, including the officer's badge and patrol car numbers and the agency they work for. Get contact information for witnesses. Take photographs of any injuries. Once you have all of this information, you can file a written complaint with the agency's Internal Affairs Division or Civilian Compliant Board. Yeah. And once more, up above, you can see right there, aclu.org/no-your-rights slash protesters rights. What happens if the police issues an order to disperse the protest? Shutting down a protest through a dispersal order must be law enforcement's last resort. Police may not break up a gathering unless there is a clear and present danger of riot, disorder, interference with traffic, or other immediate threat to public safety. If officers issue a dispersal order, they must provide a reasonable opportunity to comply, including sufficient time and a clear, unobstructed exit path. Individuals must receive clear and detailed notice of a dispersal order, including how much time they have to disperse, the consequences of failing to disperse, and what clear exit route they can follow, before they may be arrested or charged with any crime. We had delved a little bit into this earlier, and yeah, totally, these kinds of things you have to constantly think of. June 2025. LAPD has been filmed, straight up recorded evidence, shooting a news reporter in the back with rubber bullets, shooting an innocent bystander trying to go home to her apartment, trampling people on horseback. There was an overhead view of three police officers on horseback trying to force their horses to trample a man that was lying on the ground. He had already been to a point where he was not a threat. The horses had more sense to not hurt that individual on the floor. There was a separate video in which a police officer on horseback was trying to strike an individual with his stick, and in the process, he hit his own horse in the fucking face. There is another video that I think of a lot of a man who watched a person in uniform with the police remove their identification. All of these people are wearing riot gear and it has their fucking names on the forehead and they have their badge numbers. A man recorded one had removed his helmet's name and he was pacing with a gun. And from 5 feet away, after making demands to see his badge number, he shot him in the groin. You know, these things are straight up fucking crimes. This is unlawful conduct, and there was no provocation leading to any of that stuff that would merit that level of action. Once again, like, we're working to raise fundage for ACLU through Tiltify. You can go to the website themselves, like I said, aclu.org or aclusocal.org, and directly contribute to the cause. Thank you for sharing that, Angel. Were you injured by the police during a recent protest in the Los Angeles area? If so, we want to hear from you. They have this posted on their website at ACLU SoCal. And here is the URL. aclusocal.org/en/let dash us dash no dash were dash you dash injured dash police dash while dash protesting dash Southern dash California dash recently. I appreciate you sharing the link. Yeah, I do what I can to not only share the written information visually, the text helps in chat. I'm trying to be as detailed as possible vocally because people are also blind. Yeah. There have been over 80 years of discrimination and excessive force in modern day Los Angeles. And as I have been describing most of the day I've been here, modern day Los Angeles would be the period in time that we outlawed slavery and segregation a bit. Unfortunately, there has been a lot of stuff going on after the Civil War and slavery ending there. The segregation was legal. Holocaust was also legal, I keep saying. So don't look to the whether or not it being legal or not as something correlating to right or wrong. Los Angeles in particular has had many experiences with racial discrimination and excessive force by governing entities in this period of time in which we would consider ourselves civilized man. To bring up several of those incidents, we could point to, and this is for Los Angeles in particular, the Zoot Suit riots. Conflicts between Latino youths wearing zoot suits and servicemen, particularly sailors, stationed in Los Angeles. Tensions escalated due to the cultural differences, perceptions of zoot suits as wasteful during wartime, and some sailors' attempts to physically assault zoot suiters. This clash of cultures and whatnot, the idea of priority And that was one of those things, like a group of individuals who would consider themselves loyal to the nation versus somebody who is also part of the nation but embracing another culture. It's a conflict as those things begin to overlap. Um, that was 1943. The Watts riots happened 1965. The immediate trigger for the riots was the arrest of an African American man, Marquette Fry, by a white California Highway Patrol officer, worsened by long standing police brutality, racial discrimination, and economic hardship in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles. And that's something that like it was building up over time. It is not something that was one issue at that date sparking it. It was just boiling and boiling up, building up, and it finally boiled over. And this was the period of time, like we said, segregation was outlawed about 70 years ago, 71 years ago. Um, and it really didn't stop people, obviously. Um, Fast forward another few decades, you got the Rodney King riots. The also it was also considered the Los Angeles uprising. Um, Not necessarily they'll say, "Oh, Rodney King." That was another thing that it was considered. Erupted after a jury was acquitted after a jury acquitted four LAPD officers of using excessive force against Rodney King in a videotaped beating. Evidence of this occurring was present, and they still just went ahead and said, "Nah, they're good." The riots caused widespread damage, including over 1 billion in property damage, 63 deaths, over 2,000 injuries, and 8,000 arrests. I didn't look it up, but that is one. I don't know if that's 1 billion in property damage in 1992 or a billion in value in today's currency with inflation. But regardless, that's still a severe uh, a severe response. Yeah. And then, fast forward today, there have been a lot of things in between all of that, but I chose these four to highlight Los Angeles and the civil unrest in that area in particular. These anti-ice protests, they're occurring. They've been going on June 6th to now, 8 days later. These protests, which began in early June 2025, were triggered by ICE raids and arrests of undocumented immigrants in the Los Angeles area and continue across the nation, like literally right now. It's wild. And so one of the big things that I have to deal with coming from an area where I work with a lot of youth. I've done hospice. I work with the elderly. I'm around a lot of folks in the countryside, and we have had many discussions that revolved around culture, ethnicity, and nationality, but they didn't truly understand like what each of those meant, how they correlate, and how they're different. That's something that's been major, major, major. You know, um, we'll start by defining them all. All right, culture, um, behavior peculiar to Homo sapiens, together with material objects used as an integral part of this behavior. Thus, culture includes language, ideas, beliefs, customs, codes, institutions, tools, techniques, works of art, rituals, and ceremonies, among other elements. And, like me, I'm sourcing, so, that was from Britannica.com/topic/culture. And it actually tells you who fucking wrote that. Leslie A. White for that one. Ethnicity. Ethnicity, a complex concept that refers to a person's identification with a specific group of people based on one or more shared traits, which may include ancestry, culture, language, religion, customs, and nationality. The term derives from the Greek word ethnos, which usually refers to a nation, caste, tribe, or people. Ethnicity is shaped by a variety of historical, political, social, and cultural factors through interactions between individuals and groups. On an individual level, ethnicity refers to a person's affiliation with or affinity for a group and to the reciprocated acknowledgement of shared origins between the individual and the group. In a broader sense, ethnicity also refers to the interactions between groups, leading to the overall framing of the discourses of modern nation states. August Samey, Britannica.com/topic/ethnicity. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then nationality. Nationality, in law, membership in a nation or sovereign state. It is to be distinguished from citizenship, a somewhat narrower term that is sometimes used to denote the status of those nationals who have full political privileges. Before an act of the U.S. Congress made them citizens, for example, American Indians were sometimes referred to as non citizen nationals. Individuals, companies, corporations, ships, and aircrafts all have nationality for legal purposes. It is in reference to natural persons, however, that the term finds most frequent use. Nationality is in fact commonly regarded as an inalienable right of every human being. Thus, the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, states that everyone has the right to a nationality and that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality. Nationality is of cardinal importance because it is mainly through nationality that the individual comes within the scope of international law and has access to the political and economic rights and privileges conferred by modern states of their nationals. And then I put together this nifty Venn diagram for people who can't read or do math. So, as I described earlier, there are differences between culture, ethnicity, and nationality. We have discussions where we're trying to discuss one of those things and end up referring to another. And as you can see, they do have differences, but there are things that bridge the gaps. They overlap. Um, our ancestry can be defined by our culture and ethnicity. Our citizenship can be defined by our nationality and culture. Our heritage can be defined by our nationality and ethnicity. Combining the three and understanding more of your ancestry, your heritage, and your citizenship, you begin to understand humanity. You know, as much as I could try and narrow this all down into a Venn diagram and stuff, every one of us can pinpoint something about ourselves there, and it won't be the same. And understanding that there is multiple cultures, multiple ethnicities, and acknowledging that multiple nationalities are out there and equal to us. We're closer to, being better with our humanity. That's really more or less what I put towards that. I made this. That was me. There's no source for that. I have a picture. If you want to look at it and think thoughts, there you go. This is your moment. Um, and so, really, really do consider that when we have these discussions. Because, like, I brought it up earlier, sharing some of my own experiences. Though my ethnicity points towards indigenous Native American, um, and having traces of like Lebanese and a Spaniard. Um, I've referred to myself as Mexican because I was raised in the Mexican culture. My I shared the picture earlier of my great great grandparents before they came to the states. Um, my family went from Lebanon to Spain to Mexico, into the area that most of them are in now, Beaumont, California. My great grandfather is in the book about Beaumont, California. And like there's this trace history where they were there like 10 years before the city was established. And like it's a nifty fact. I don't like to sit there and be like, we were here longer than you, so get the fuck out or whatever. It's just interesting to know that they were here at that point in time and more than likely participated in the development of that city and then some. My great grandfather actually did a lot for the city. And in his passing, they changed the name of the park where in his neighborhood to the Barrio District, which is cool, you know. And so yeah, like I said, um, I was more into the culture. I was raised in the culture. My elders, at one point, they were Mexican nationals and immigrants. And there are also those that have more higher percentage of Mexican ethnicity than I. Um, I'm more like I said Native American because of my father. Um, and my mother and her family like they've just got traces of ethnicity in different parts of the world like crazy. It was interesting to see. But all in all, still Mexican, you know. There are people out there. I've been told straight up, like I would talk to people about this stuff, and I get told, "You're not a Mexican," because they were raised to believe that Mexicans come from Mexico, but that implies that all the Mexicans are in Mexico and all the Americans are in America, even though they're descendants of colonials from overseas, immigrants, you know. So that's the kind of conversation that we'll have and we'll hear from people, you know, all the time. All the time. And it actually creates division as well because you'll get it. I've gotten it. I've had someone tell me, "Oh, you're one of the good ones." It's not the same. What does that mean? Anyways, we move on to the next part. Okay, there's some other things to diving into. So we had talked a little bit about the protests, your rights, the differences between culture, ethnicity, nationality, and how if you have a greater understanding of your own and others, you yourself become multicultural. So, another event revolving around racial discrimination occurred in the period after World War II, between the years 1942 and 1945. Um, the internment of Japanese Americans. Um, and I really wanted to bring it up today because it is 100% history repeating itself. What's happening today with the president and ICE is similar to what happened with FDR and some of these other groups like the WCCA. Uh, so I'll go ahead and read some of this to you. Manzanar and how we repeat history with ICE. Executive Order 9066, signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on February 19th, 1942, authorized what was to become the mass forced removal and incarceration of all Japanese Americans on the West Coast. The order authorized the Secretary of War and any military commander designated by him to prescribe military areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. The order does not mention Japanese Americans by name. As a result of this order, some 110,000 Japanese Americans living on the West Coast were removed from the West Coast, most to inland concentration camps. Public Law 503, enacted a month later, allowed federal courts to enforce the military orders resulting from EO 9066. And I described this site where you can get all of this information before, densho.org. They have encyclopedia.densho.org. This one in particular, encyclopedia.densho.org/executive underscore order underscore 9066. And this was a period of time they weren't really about logos and stuff. There was a lot of stuff that was just a public decree slapped on a fucking notice board somewhere, and it was held out by a few folks. The Western Defense Command was a big player in this, but there was another one. Thank you so much, Angel, for sharing that. The Wartime Civil Control Administration, the WCCA, they would oversee a lot of stuff, and in the documentation, they would try and take credit for a lot of the work. But 100%, they made these people do this shit on their own. I remember that. The Wartime Civil Control Administration, WCCA, was an agency set up as part of the Western Defense Command to implement the mass forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. In addition to engineering the logistics of removing some 110,000 people from their homes and businesses in a short period of time, the WCCA also quickly built and administered a series of 17 temporary detention camps to hold those who had been removed through the spring and summer of 1942, before overseeing their transfer to more permanent camps administered by the War Relocation Authority by the end of fall 1942. And Angel posted the link to that one, encyclopedia.densho.org/wartime underscore civil underscore control underscore administration. Yeah, these were the people slapping these decrees everywhere, telling them like, hey, get ready, we're about to uproot you and you gotta go. As I had described before, where they had taken credit for things they didn't do, these people oversaw the internment camps. They didn't build them. There's tons of accounts of they forced them to build them themselves out of scrap wood. So don't let the government take credit for that shit. They're forcing people to DIY. They've been doing it for decades. Yeah. And the other group that was present, the War Relocation Authority. This group was introduced later on to help move the internment camps to more permanent residences. They were temporarily uprooted and placed elsewhere. Like George Takei talked about how his family had forcibly lived in a horse stall. They were forcing them to sleep in horse stalls when they were first taken away. Sorry. The War Relocation Authority, WRA, was the federal agency created in 1942 to care for the 110,000 Japanese Americans whom the Army removed from the West Coast during World War II. Under the leadership of directors Milton Eisenhower, briefly, and Dylan S. Meyer, the WRA built and operated a network of camps in the interior, where those removed were subjected to involuntary confinement. As part of the agency's mission to resettle Japanese Americans outside of the West Coast excluded zone, WRA officials implemented a controversial loyalty program that led to segregation and harsh treatment of those inmates deemed disloyal, even as they took up the defense of those adjudged loyal, and assisted them to find jobs and housing outside the camps. The legacy of the WRA and the opinion of both former inmates and historians as to the agency remains mixed and evolving. There's so much that happened with this. Like I said, so on paper, what the government wants is like, we're gonna put together a agency to do the right thing for the American civilian by separating Japanese Americans from everyone else. It will be structured, it will be organized, we will take funding and supplies and make it happen. That's it sounds good, but that's not how it went down. You know, like I said before, the WCCA, according to documentation, takes credit for building the camps, in which, like I said, they straight up they housed them in like horse stalls and stuff, and then they gave them scrap wood and told them to build it themselves. There was a lot of conflicts that were going on between the groups running the camp and the groups that were developing within the camp amongst the people who were trying to organize and maintain their own structure for survival. Um, I don't know if I said the link to that one. Encyclopedia.densho.org/war underscore relocation underscore authority. Um, you could look all over the internet. You can look up George Takei. If you don't know him, he's a famous American actor who is notably known for his role in Star Trek as Sulu. Um, and um, he has been very outspoken for decades about his experiences, not only um, with this, but for Pride as well. Um, so um, there is this tidbit that I had grabbed from an article online when he went to talk to some folks at Chapman University, titled "I Will Never Be Able to Forget." George Takei shares internment experiences with Chapman by Joy Judes. Um, he describes it, they stopped on the front porch and with their fists they banged on the door. My father answered the door and they pointed those bayonets at all of us and told us to leave, said Takei, who was 5 at the time. When his mother came out of the house, tears were streaming down her cheeks. The terror of that morning is seared into my memory, Takei said. Takei and his family had to live in a horse stall at Santa Anita Park, then were taken by train to a camp in Arkansas. To keep his family calm, Takei's father told them the train ride was a long vacation to the countryside. Imagine, they're doing everything they can to just, you know, survive, deal with it without succumbing to shame. That's been a big thing. They put them through a very shameful experience through all of that, like going from having normal lives. Freaking, this is the era in which folks were uh America, the land of opportunity. Freaking, the streets are paved in gold. This was that time. A little bit after, that the people were making their way over. But the wartime had shifted a lot of people's mindset. It really did kind of just cloister a lot of folks. Almost 75 years later, Takei is still angry about it. Think of that, the arrogance of demanding loyalty when they have, first of all, impoverished you and then imprisoned you, and now, because it fits their need and convenience. Um, is what George Takei had to say regarding the Trump administration in 2019. George Takei is on a mission to teach the lessons of internment in the era of Trump by Martin Wolk. And like I have been saying, we gotta do what we can to raise awareness for those after us, because they're the ones that are gonna have to deal with the outcome of what we're doing now, and like the teachings of those before us. And those before us have low key let us down. There's a lot that people that were alive around this time, our elders that are only a decade younger than that will never speak about this stuff. They live quietly, live in shame. That's 100% that. I think of that quite often, and how I had to learn about all of this stuff through our own study. You know what I mean? This was not stuff that was taught to me by my parents or their parents. They don't talk about it. Everybody's just living quietly, and we're seeing it slowly happen again. As we could see George Takei talking about it, he's seeing it again. Like this turnabout, how quickly they were cast aside and how quickly they're demanding the loyalty again or get cast out again. We're seeing it hardcore. And so he's telling his story in a different manner too, which like we can watch videos on it, we could read about it, but if you try and show that kind of stuff to the kids, they won't know. It's difficult, but really do have to show folks all of this stuff the same way we learned about it, learned about a few different things, and Frank, um, I grew up reading, learning from Farewell to Manzanar. Um, I talk about how in our youth, my parents, they would take us to Bishop in the summer to go camping. And on the way there, a few times, we stopped at what was left of Manzanar, which is almost nothing. It was just a barbed wire fence and some elk in a field. And everything that we had learned otherwise. There was nothing there. Like, it's just, they tried to wipe everything about it. And that's the problem. And so that's why this kind of thing is very important, not only to keep that mark in history, but share it with others who, in the future, they'll see it and like recognize what is right and what is wrong. Sorry. Um, and so there were some pivotal events that occurred within the Manzanar internment camp that have major impact. You have, like, to me, it was like one of the things I thought about right away. Like I said, there were some groups within the internment camp that were trying to develop structure, and there was differences in their belief system, and there was also an issue that was occurring, um, that there was dissent within. There was this major fear. I mean, the first thing that started it was the fact that the American government believed that there were Japanese spies in America feeding information to Japan, and that was why they sent him to the internment camp, right? And so that was one thing, but there had become speculation that some people were working with the American government from within the camp as well to tell on everybody else. This kind of mindset had just killed trust. It's something that kills community, it kills structure when there's the total dissent, lack of trust. And like I described before, there was already issues between the inmates and the people running the camps over like corruption, people stealing supplies from the camps and shit. And that's part of what revolved around the Manzanar riot. Um, so I'll go ahead. I'll read this. Um, a December 1942 incident at the Manzanar camp that resulted in the institution of martial law at the camp, and that culminated with soldiers firing into a crowd of inmates, killing two and injuring many. The incident was triggered by the beating of Japanese American Citizens League, one of the groups I described, leader Fred Tayama, upon his return from a meeting in Salt Lake City, and the arrest and detention of Harry Ueno for the beating. So this one guy returned to camp after having a meeting, and mysteriously in the night, like six dudes wearing masks came in and beat the shit out of that dude. And obviously, it's only eyewitnesses and word of mouth. So people pointed the finger at Harry, they're accusing him as being involved in the beating of that guy. Um, but they believe that they only arrested him because he had brought up the fact that the camp was stealing supplies from the inmates. That was a whole big deal about that, and it caused a massive uproar. Um, Coming 1 year after the attack on Pearl Harbor, sensationalist coverage of the event inflamed anti-Japanese sentiment outside the camps. The episode exposed deep divisions within the inmate population and with the camp administration. Like I said, they were trying to do the right thing. They straight up for a little bit of time were so yeah, Harry was arrested, and the groups within the camp wanted justice, but they wanted to be able to work with that man instead of him being held behind bars. And so they as a group approached the police station that this inmate was being held, Harry Ueno, and military police were called in to keep the peace. And this thing occurred where the mob decided to move a car, and they moved the car and faced it towards the police line. And so they took that as a threat and they fired at the crowd um, to disperse it. It wasn't that killed people. It was two privates after that who were like, "Oh, all right, that's the threat. Well, I'm going to go ahead and shoot into the crowd this way anyways." And so they just randomly fired into the crowd and killed two people. When the dust had settled, one young man, 17-year-old James Ito of Los Angeles, had been killed by the gunfire. Another, 21-year-old Jim Kanagawa of Tacoma, would die of injuries several days later. 9 others were shot but survived. A military investigation of the actions of the MPs in January 1943 exonerated them of any wrongdoing, concluding that Cherubini and Moore were justified in firing their weapons because members of the mob were closing in and surging towards them. Like I said, their accounts, like what I described, a mob of people moved a car to face it towards a police line, and they fired at that crowd. But these people that I just described, Cherubini and Moore, they're just like, "Oh damn, that just happened. Well, anyways, I'm gonna start firing this way." That's what happened. So that was one of the major things about this. Like we said, they're just excessive force, indiscriminate harm. It's wild, and so these were the events that culminated to a point in which they decide, um, we have to do something differently with this. And so they straight up started taking different people from this camp and shipping them different directions to try and avoid any further conflict. Um, Conflicts from within the marginalized community. Um, Nisei versus Issei. There was a significant tension between the Nisei, American citizens of Japanese descent, and the Issei, first generation Japanese immigrants, who were barred by law from becoming U.S. citizens. There was that thing I told you about, the loyalty questions. The controversial loyalty questionnaire exacerbated these divisions as it forced internees to make difficult choices about allegiance to the U.S. The JACL and anti JACL groups. Divisions existed with the Japanese American community at Manzanar, notably between those aligned with the Japanese American Citizens League and groups opposed to their strategies. Accusations of informants. Some JACL aligned Nisei were suspected of acting as informants for the FBI, adding to the mistrust within the camp. So, like, these were all these conflicts that were created stemming from racial discrimination. The idea that Japanese Americans on American soil could potentially be influenced by foreigners and change their way of life. That's literally what started all of this. All of this that occurred was because of prejudice and discrimination. And it just spirals into so much. And it created a whole culture of hate, effectively. People pointing fingers at each other. It's not me, their fault, his fault, her fault. It's just straight up this inability for everybody to like sit down and get over their indifferences, hash it out. Um, Thank you for posting those links. Sorry, the one of the last pages talking about the Manzanar riot was at densho.org/catalyst/remembering dash Manzanar dash riot. Um, this was one of those things that's like, oh, it's crazy because we're gonna see these kinds of things today, and we've seen it with the government in which they're hosting rallies, um, and they're vetting people based on their level of allegiance to those hosting the rally. People are getting checked, background checks based on who they voted for and who they are in favor of regarding the president. You know, that's happening today. And it's eerily similar to what they wanted back in 1943 with the loyalty questionnaire. Um, in 1943, the War Relocation Authority and the War Department joined forces to try and suss out Japanese American military recruits and loyal citizens that could be released early from concentration camps. The questionnaire required respondents to name references outside camp, list the publications they read, and share other relatively mundane details. The majority of the questions were patronizing and insulting given the circumstances, but largely benign. However, questions 27 and 28 were particularly problematic. And, like, legitimately, there's a 4-page application, and it's like filling out a questionnaire when going to the doctor. It's like name, address, who's your family, what's their background like, where do you live. It was literally like like 3.5 pages of that, and then you have these two questions that they decided to throw in there, and it caused crazy. It was a weird thing. Like it's weird. Question 27. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? Question 28. Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese Emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization? This it is really interesting to think about when there's stuff in regards to the law and law enforcement. Wording is something that you have to be particular of. So many people looked at these two questions and they really had a difficult time figuring out what they believe was the right answer, you know? And they asked a few people about these questions. This individual, referred to as Takashita, um, of question 27, Takashita said, now, if you were a young mother with kids, how could they, if they were responsible parents, how could they answer this? Yes, and serve on combat duty wherever ordered. And also, a father who had young kids, yet, and was responsible for the family, how would he be willing to or be able to answer this on combat duty wherever ordered? So there was a lot of rumors about how to answer this question. And I remember rumors that this was one of the ways that the United States was going to try to get rid of us by sending us all to combat duty. So there was a lot of questions as to how to answer that question. Yeah, they believed it was a trick question to get uprooted and sent elsewhere again. A way of getting rid of someone is by forcing them to die on the battlefield somewhere where it's convenient for the leader, you know? And of question 28's prompt to forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor, Takashita noted, many people who lived in the United States were born in the United States, had no idea who the Japanese emperor was. Of course, our parents knew because they were born in Japan and immigrated legally to the United States. But so if you answer this yes, then that means that at one time you had sworn allegiance to the Japanese emperor, and now you're swearing allegiance to the United States. And besides, our parents were Japanese citizens. Born in Japan, they were forbidden by American alien land law in 1924, where they could not become American citizens even though they wanted to, and they could not own property. So it again became a dilemma because, like my parents, if they answered it yes, then they would be a person without a country. The difficulty in laws and law enforcement is whether or not those laws make sense. And that's something that's been occurring for a long time. Something that was put together with without structure but being implemented in a way where that structure can be interpreted differently, you know? It's there's so much confusion, and this actually led to, like, this was part of the dissent within the camp because people were having conflicts about how to answer that. What was the right answer there? You know? Like, it's very difficult to have an appropriate answer for something like that, you know? Oh, here we go. Okay, so real quick before I do this video, I will be right back. Okay, I have to use the restroom one more time. Intermission. Yeah, see. All right, sorry. Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, I have a restroom in my room, so it's pretty easy for me to go in and out, wash my hands right there at the sink. uh, I washed my hands. I promise. I didn't dry them though. All right. One of the last things I have to share is a video with um, folks who were survivors of the internment camp and their description of life in that period of time and what they've had to deal with. So I'm going to mute myself on top of this video so you don't hear me. I'm going to watch as well. I've watched this one a couple of times. I think it's good. Um,
Mine is just one story, and there are 100,000 other stories. Each story is different. Each pain is different. I was fortunate not to have painful memories, but there are a lot of people who have had very painful experiences. Mine is not the average story. Mine is one of the maybe luckier stories of a childhood behind bars.
Children and adults who were born and raised in the United States were locked in internment camps on American soil solely because they were of Japanese descent. This happened during World War II. While the soldiers who fought in this war and the Rosie the Riveters who were their lifeline on the home front are hailed as the greatest generation, there are people still affected by what it feels like to be mistakenly considered an enemy of their own country.
It was both prejudice, wartime hysteria, like they said, and failed leadership of our government leaders that sent us all into what we call America's concentration camps, which are different from Nazi concentration camps. Those were death camps that they were sent to. Ours was not like that. Ours was just being behind prison barbed wire fences with armed guards, making sure that no one escapes.
June Burke and Mas Yamashita are both survivors of internment camps. June Burke is a California native.
I was born in Hollywood, went to Dayton Heights Grammar School in Hollywood, and lived a pretty normal life. I didn't feel any special prejudice against us as children. But later on, when I grew up, I read all these things that were said in the newspapers that were said by politicians and different people.
An American naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was pummeled by a surprise attack by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. It happened before 8 a.m. on December 7, 1941. 2,403 Americans, sailors, soldiers, and civilian personnel died that day.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
At the time, the United States was still claiming neutrality in World War II, but the attack launched them into the fight.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
I was 6 when the war broke out.
I was 10 years old when December 7th happened and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Immediately, all Japanese were fired, even from the studios, government jobs, and also students who were going to UCLA or USC could not go back to school. And then they set up a curfew area where we could no longer travel more than 5 miles from our home, and we had to be at home by 7:30. And this law was fought all the way up to the Supreme Court, but they ruled that in wartime, the Army has the right to do this. So they lost the case in the Supreme Court. Because they couldn't travel more than 5 miles, a lot of families moved in together. And because everybody was fired and didn't have jobs, they also started using their savings. And the savings were being depleted when Executive Order 9066 came into being, and we were all forced to leave our homes.
This evacuation of the Japanese has been ordered by the Army.
Presidential Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It authorized the forced removal of people with Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast to what the government called relocation centers. The camps were not finished yet, so the government used places normally only fit for animals to serve as Japanese detention centers.
Japanese living here in Southern California, they were taken to Santa Anita, which is a racetrack, and the Pomona Fairgrounds. We were living up in Oakland, Northern California, and the people living up in Northern California, we were taken to Tanfran, which was a racetrack. There were these posters that were put up all over the West Coast. The one that went in your neighborhood told you to report to such and such a place. So to make sure, once the order came out, that there won't be any demonstrations or resistance, the FBI rounded up what they considered community leaders, Japanese community leaders, and took them away.
Burke remembers the day she learned her family would be forced to move.
My sister and I were walking home from a movie, and she started seeing these signs on the telephone post that said, Japanese in this area have to be out of here by a certain date. It was for us, it was May 7th, which gave us about a week to get rid of all of our belongings. And my sister went home, and I remember her yelling at my parents. She was saying, you were born in Japan, so you have to go to camp. But I am a United States citizen. I just took a class in constitutional rights, and they can't do this to American citizens. My mother said to her, well, who's going to take care of us in camp? And who's going to take care of you out here by yourself? So my sister said, yeah, right, I'll go to camp with you.
Burke's family, along with many others, were moved to the Santa Anita racetrack.
They gave us a tag with a number on it. And they said to us, this is your number. This is your family number. Our number was like 3407. And they said, for the rest of the time you are here in Santa Anita or wherever you go, you don't use your family name. You use your number. And so immediately you lose your identity like that. No one could take pets into the camps with them. And that was a really tragic, sad thing for a child. Then they told us, go over to that haystack and fill your pillow with straw. So we put the hay and pillow, and then we dragged it up the road. And then they said, well, this one here, barn 54, is the horse stall where you're going to live.
We didn't have mattresses. We had to stuff these bags with straw and hay, and that's what we slept on. Because I can remember it being so dusty in these stalls.
My mother, my father, and I slept in the back part of the horse stall, where I guess the horses would be. And then the front part, which we called our living room, was my brother's bed and my sister's bed. That's probably where they kept the hay for the horses to eat. At night, they would, in Santa Anita, they would have bed checks, and we had to all be in our bed, and they put a flashlight in our face and make sure you're in your bed. And then it's lights out for the whole camp. And then they had searchlights going all around the camp to make sure that no one's trying to escape. I thought, well, this is what happens when you're in camp, when you're in a prison. Right now, they use it for the horse receiving barn before they go out on the races. But in the wartime days, this whole large room was shower faucets. They put a plyboard inside this huge room, and half of the room was for women and half of the room was for men. And just this plywood board separating us. And everybody was assigned to eat at a certain mess hall. There were 6 mess halls. The red mess hall was in the grandstand, where we had classes, where we had programs, where we had school. Really nice, beautiful. The other mess halls were all in the barrack, which was okay. And then the blue mess hall was in the stables, which had horse flies and stuff. I remember once my father got really angry. He had a hot temper, and he stood up and he told this waitress, "You put on a hairnet or a scarf because your hair can get in my food." So we thought, my God, here's this horrible conditions that we're living in, and he's worried about a hairnet for a girl.
Burke says her parents and other adults were careful not to fill the children with fear.
They always remain calm. I don't know how they felt when they went with us, but there's a Japanese saying that says "kodomo no tame ni," and that means for the sake of the children. They wanted to make sure that all the children grew up in a normal, happy surroundings. So we had libraries and books in schools. The elders all printed newspapers, make sure that we all knew everybody knew what was going on, and also set up softball leagues, baseball leagues, basketball for both boys and girls, and Cub Scouts, and all the normal things, activities that children do. As a second generation born here in Los Angeles, I feel really indebted to our Issei, we call it first generation Issei, the immigrants, our parents. They kept telling Japan, don't go to war with the United States because Japan is like our mother and father, and we were born there. So our parents are still there, but our children are born here in America. So it's like asking you to choose between a mother and a father. And they begged Japan not to go to war with the United States. Well, that didn't work.
After about 6 months at the racetrack, Yamashita's family was moved to the Topaz internment camp in Utah.
They put us on trains. I remember that because I'd never been on a train before. They covered up the windows with black paper or black cloth or something. I didn't know why they didn't want us to look out. They didn't want people to see us. I don't know. So in each car, there was a soldier with a rifle, and they had bayonets on the, I remember that. They had bayonets on the rifle. Anyway, very intimidating. And so our block was block 13. I tell people, you'll never forget your block number because there were no trees, nothing to block the wind. So we used to get dust storms all the time, and you couldn't keep the dust, sand out of the rooms.
Burke's family was moved from the racetrack to another internment camp in Roanoke, Arkansas.
They always emphasize, oh, look how much fun you're going to have. You're going to go on a train ride. You're going to go on a bus ride. And I get, oh, I've never been on a train before. I've never been on a big bus before. So it was all a new adventure for me. And I remember it as that because, again, they didn't want to put fear in children's minds. They wanted us to feel safe and comfortable. But I also saw poverty in Arkansas and Jim Crow. My father rode on a bus and he was told to sit with the white people, and he couldn't sit in the back of the bus. And he came back to camp saying, I'm an enemy alien. I should be in jail, and yet they treat me better than they treat the people who live here. He thought it was incredible that that was going on in the United States. He never saw that before in his life.
She recalls why many school-aged children took on Americanized names and how it had lasting generational effects.
The teachers were from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, so they all had the southern drawl. To hear them try to pronounce Japanese name with a southern drawl, all of us kids would sit there and we just laugh. We would just, oh my God, she's murdering our names, you know. So I think that's when a lot of us started using our American names. Like I changed my name to June because they couldn't pronounce my Japanese name, Yasuno.
And in the relocation centers, life goes on. From kindergarten up, it's an all-American course for these youngsters.
Oh, they outlawed Japanese schools in the camps. Us kids were going, yay, we don't have to go to Japanese school, good. I always spoke Japanese in my home to my parents, and to my elders, I always spoke Japanese. But as I grew up and I had children, I didn't speak Japanese in my home, it was all English. So I think a lot of culture was lost in that. The third generation didn't have the opportunity to learn Japanese unless they were sent to a Japanese school where they were taught the Japanese language. But most of us didn't do that. And so there was sort of a loss of a culture there, I think. But strangely enough, while the Army said you can't have Japanese language schools, they also said, for the sake of the elderly people, we can perform Japanese dances, we can put on Japanese plays, and we could sing Japanese songs. So a lot of the young girls like my age, we all took up Japanese dancing, and we took up kabuki and playing the shamisen like a fiddle and learning how to sing Japanese songs. There were some happy stories to come out of our misery. My sister worked in one of the mess halls, and she was always late because she could never get herself ready to get to the mess hall in time. But this young man started asking her for a date, and they dated in camp, and she was just a senior in high school, and he was a college student. They both went to 2 separate concentration camps. He went to Amachi. My sister and I, our family, went to Aurora, Arkansas. So they corresponded every day, and they finally married.
Yamashita's family was incarcerated in the Topaz camp for almost 4 years.
When the war ended and we were released, they gave each person $25 and a bus ticket or a train ticket wherever you were going.
With the $225 total that the U.S. government gave Yamashita, his parents, and siblings, the family did not return to California. They settled in Salt Lake City. He says it was a culture shock after being held at a camp where everyone was of the same heritage.
Hollywood was making these war pictures, and the Japanese were always the bad guys, right?
If the gods are kind, I will be in the White House when Japan dictates her terms of peace.
So I became aware of being Japanese.
By VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, which honors the day the Allies accepted Germany's surrender, May 8, 1945, Burke and her family were freed. She remembers how she felt on VJ Day, the day marking victory over Japan.
I was living in Denver. On VJ Day, there's such a sense of relief that the war is over. We all said at that time, it's the end of all wars. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But somehow we have to keep saying no more war, no more violence.
Between 1942 and 1945, there were 10 internment camps holding American citizens of Japanese descent. About 120,000 people were detained against their will. Burke hopes America has learned its lesson.
We have to learn from past mistakes. We have to learn not to teach our kids to hate. Have them feel tenderness and kindness to one another. I think that's so important. The only way we can do that is how we treat one another. Race or color or ethnicity doesn't come into that. That's universal.
The internment camps had lasting economic effects. Those incarcerated lost an estimated $400 million in property during the war. In 1948, Congress provided just $38 million in reparations to survivors of the camps.
You have to remember there were 120,000 different stories, and so mine is just one. So if you talk the age groups between 10 and 13, all we remember is having fun in camp. It's the older people, 19, 20 years old, who wanted to have a college education and were denied, or trying to get a work and were denied, and they struggled differently.
My fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong.
President Ronald Reagan issued a formal apology to Japanese Americans in 1988. With the passage of the Civil Liberties Act that same year, cash payments of $20,000 were given to each surviving Japanese American who was a U.S. citizen or legal resident at the time of their internment.
I'm just hoping that our political leadership will recognize the pain of separating people from each other, and also from parents, from children.
Despite how the U.S. treated her family and so many others, Burke says she is still proud to be an American.
I think there's a sense of being proud to be an American, and hopefully that this never happens again to any other group. And that's why we try to tell our stories.
I'm TC Newman for Inside Edition Digital.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. And the takeaway from there, like we said, is that let's not bring this into the next generations. You know, I don't want my nieces and nephews to go through the same shit that these people had to go through. And you know, like we said, the stuff that occurred between 1942 and 1945, the government didn't bother acknowledging the wrongdoings until 1988. So, you know, let's do what we can to avoid that happening now, you know, so that we don't have somebody 30 years from now having to fucking apologize for the actions that we commit to now. So food for thought. Let me take it off emote only mode now. Sorry. Because this shit has been pretty boggling to the mind. What we've discussed thus far, during this slideshow regarding Japanese American internment, Manzanar, and we put it side by side with what's happening today. Is Trump using ICE like FDR used the WCCA to effectively commit to this discrimination? Absolutely. And one of the last things I point out is it can happen to you, the same way it happened to them, and it's happened to many other people. You know. Oh God. Sorry, that last bit was pretty rough. It should be rough. History should make you uncomfortable. You don't know your history. If history doesn't make you comfortable, you're not really paying attention. You know. Just want everyone to be aware of that. Sorry, this watching the video got me feeling a certain way, and then I made these slideshows, little bits, and like this one's kind of goofy, but yeah, that was it. Really, um, don't forget to support our cause. Thank you for taking the time to hear me out and to chill with us, to hold space for those who are being wronged in this period in time. As you can see, fuck ICE. We're totally against that. Right now, today, as we dive back into the present, we're doing fundraising for ACLU SoCal. Thank you for sharing those resources in chat, Angel. You can go to tiltify.com /at potquest /agua AGUA dash sin SIN dash hielo HIELO dash water dash without dash ice. Governing entities have taken action near home in Los Angeles, California. Again, as we pointed out, we stand with our friends, family, and the community that raised us. We support those who attend peaceful assembly against ICE and their unjust cause. Just straight up, you know. If there was more that I could do, I would do it. You know, I myself in particular, compared to my parents, my siblings, I think I'm in a position where I can be doing more. At this point in time, this is the most that I could do from home, with our community. I appreciate you all showing up and just, like I said, taking the time to uh, hear us out, do the thing. Oh God, sorry. That should. It's just happening all over and over again, and eventually, something's got to give. One could hope, and I just hope that it is something that isn't so fierce. Nobody wants violence. Yeah, sure. We'll roll a joint. Sorry, I feel like one of those kids. I was like crying right now, and like I'm just like choking from it. So, ugh. Yeah, let's get a joint in. Um, yeah, there's a lot of hate that has been brought on by prejudice and discrimination built off of paranoia, fear mongering. There is nothing like I want to sit there and be like, I just calling people out, like, prove to me through evidence, example, why what is happening today with ICE is just. It doesn't make sense. There's no good cause for this, and it infuriates me. You know, you should be angry too. Um, like, where are we drawing the line? It's okay to have the culture, the nationality, sorry, the culture, the ethnicity, but we draw the line at nationality. We're doing that again. We're taking food and wares. We're buying things from other nations, having them brought over, but it's unacceptable for these people to be around us. We have to treat them differently. Where is the line? Why do we have to have that line? You know? Mm. I'm gonna roll a joint of the Queen of the South and mix it with some Master Kush. Um, yeah. Oh, yeah. Fuck ICE. And anybody that supports them. Um, one of the things that I try and point out to those that have an idea of supporting that, I know people who are all about defending the border, right? And when they talk about that, they only talk about the south border. What about Canada? Huh? You know? I know people that refer to people from Mexico as border brothers, but they never refer to a Canadian individual as a border brother. And that's something that clearly racism, but it's particular dialogue and referencing that is just irritating, insufferable. You know, um, you don't see these big corporations that used um, illegal immigrants to work the fields to sell their wares. You don't see them out here. They're not out there defending. Um, they're not out here defending them. They're not out there being held accountable for using that. Like if that were a thing, you know, where they're going out and arresting people at these big corporations, why aren't those people being held accountable too? You know, it's just suddenly we decided that's not okay. We're going to send them away. And then everybody else gets a slap on the wrist. I don't know. Hypocrisy at its finest.